Hi everyone, an early happy Thanksgiving is what I'm doing here, and my little portion of the video is going to be kind of short, even though I do want to do something a little different. But what I want to be showing is a scene from a movie that most of us know quite well. I'm sure you've seen it, or at the very least you've heard of it, but Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. We have Thanksgiving coming up. I thought let's try to find a really sweet little movie that's also really funny, and then let's look at a couple different scenes. I'm going to be showing a rather long section of the recording of a scene. It's multiple scenes, but for the purpose of not only showing you just this really fabulous scene, and John Candy is just the greatest ever, and we lost a legend when he passed, but the writing is really interesting because the movie version is quite different than what they did in the script, and so the different approach I'm taking this time is I'm going to show you some pages of the screenplay. Not just for purposes of showing you how they did it differently, but I've been coming across this a lot in the writers that I'm working with one-on-one, where we're trying too hard in the scene direction, and this is something that it's difficult to balance. As writers and artists, we want to be presenting something that is magical and emotional and meaningful, and we want to get the emotion down on the page. We want to make sure that the reader and the audience knows exactly what's in my head, the writer. And sometimes we take it too far, and we're not trusting the reader and the audience enough. We're not trusting the fact that this screenplay that me, the writer, am writing is something to give to someone else so that they can do something with it. So we can't over-direct the actors. We can't put everything down on the page. We don't need to express every single piece of furniture that's in the scene, regardless of the location. We don't need to reference every single motion or emotion that the actor or character is going through. And I want to show you some clips of the script at first. I want you to look at the script pages first, and then we'll get into the scene. So let's start with the first one here, which is interesting because it's the big emotional scene where Steve Martin's character, Neil, bumps into Del at the train station when Neil thought Del had left. Neil thought he was finally rid of Del. And there is Del all over again. We're right at the end of the movie here. Neil thought he was done. He thought he was home. And then suddenly Del is right there in the train station again. So let's look at the pages of the script really fast. Right after they're saying goodbye, it's the same kind of deal that we see on screen once it's actually filmed. Neil slides into a seat. He breathes this huge sigh of relief. What a trip. He reaches across the aisle, snares a discarded newspaper off the seat. He opens it. The train jolts ahead. Then we're at the Wilmette subway station. And interior station, the train pulls in, doors open. Neil steps off the station. So Neil makes it all the way to Wilmette. He gets inside the station, which is kind of funny because we're sort of doubling up on the scene headings here. But he pushes the door open. He's just looking at the newspaper. He passes the benches. Del Griffith. Del's sitting on the bench. Neil takes a few steps, stops, lowers the paper, thinks and turns. We're referencing close-ups, which is something that was pretty normal back then. But Del smiles sheepishly. Neil's dumbfounded. Del clears his throat. He just says hi. Neil, he's beyond words. Really simple references to emotion. And then we're back away from the close-up interior station. Del looks away. Neil walks over to him. Del, what are you doing here? And if you keep reading through this, Del looks up. He doesn't say anything. And Neil did not expect Del to be there, obviously. In the movie, as you'll see, Neil goes back for Del. It's a huge change. And then there's a lot of back and forth here where Del is actually Neil is very, very frustrated. He tries to leave. He starts to exit, stops, a long beat. He kicks the door. God damn it. Del jumps from the sudden noise. Poor little Del, Neil turns to him, and then Del's like, go ahead, you can be mad at me, basically. And then Neil is mad at him. I don't understand you. I don't understand any of this. I've said goodbye to you 10 times in 2 days. I know, go on home. I'm fine. Don't give me that shit, Del. Why don't you go home? Neil is being presented as a really terrible person, to be honest with you, Del looks at the floor. Del doesn't answer. What's the matter with you? Why the hell don't you go home? Del looks up at him. I can't. What do you mean you can't? Why not? A long pause. Sirius dying inside, waits for a response, holds his anger at bay. What I want you to notice about the references to the emotions, it's really simple. They're not going into this long explanation of exactly how the person is moving or their head is nodding or that there's some literary reference to this deep emotional pain. This is what we're seeing. Let the director decide how to direct the actor. And then finally Dell looks away, looks back, I don't have a home. The anger fades to be replaced by confusion. Dell looks at Neil. Sorry he's burdened him, sorry for everything he's done. That's a nice little quip, but lost and down and completely out of emotional options. Dell says Marie's been dead 15 years. Like a knife through his heart, and then boom, into your restraint station. And this is the rest of the scene in the script, which they didn't go into in the movie, which I'm kind of glad. But if you notice this spot here, this basically two lines down of scene direction, this is the reference to the sentiment, the emotional feeling that we should receive from a production standpoint. The director's seeing this and wow, it's just, but then matched with the information that's being presented, the surprise twist that Maria's been dead, and here it says 15 years, in the movie they say 8 years. That's enough. It's enough for the director to go, I can work with this. I know how to shoot this. I know how close to get up, into the faces of these actors, and I know what to tell the actors to then allow them to emote. I think it's so important to look at this. So what you notice is that it's so simple, and yet what's in the screenplay version is quite a bit longer and probably maybe even overwritten a little bit. And then when you'll eventually be watching the scene, the director, John Hughes, come on, one of the best, he understands emotion so well that he knew he didn't have to overdo it. He didn't have to over-explain anything on screen. He just needed to allow these actors to present this emotion. But what's really important to note is that in the script version, Neil continued on, meaning he didn't want to help Dell at all. So there was a major character change within the movie itself, meaning Neil ended up in the movie version, as you'll see, choosing to go back for Dell, as opposed to relying on this admission from Dell in the screenplay that his wife has been dead for however many years, he doesn't have a home. Neil first, what John Hughes did, he made Neil first realize that I made a really good friend and there might be something off with Dell and I don't know what it is, I should go back. So it gave the character agency and it allowed us, the audience, to like Neil that much more. In the script version, he's just mean, and immediately mean, and John Hughes knew that he needed to change that up. Now, I want to jump to the final scene, because when you watch the final scene, the actual visual of it and what was shot, it's so emotional, and not a lot of dialogue. That's all that essential, and yet what the actors portray on screen is very emotional. And when I'm watching scenes like that, I always think, how could I write that? What would my scene direction be for writing this type of moment? And you'll see in the pages itself, I'll show you right now, it's really simple. Let's just jump into it. The near end scene. This is when Neil and Dell get home. They get up to Neil's house. They're carrying the big trunk and everything. And everybody's saying, hey, Dad, Marty says, Daddy. And then Neil actually says, hi, sweetie. In the movie, Neil actually says, hi, kiddo, which I'm sure was a Steve Martin thing. And then in the foyer, Peg leans up the stairs and calls to Sue. Susan, Neil's home. That's in the movie. Interior foyer, Neil and Doug lug the trunk to the house and set it down. Neil closes the door. And there's just some nice little back and forth. And he starts to introduce Dell and some other people. See, like my mother, Peg, father-in-law, Harold. And that's in the movie, but it's just kind of quick and short, and it's not really the emphasis. The emphasis is on poor Dell standing there, and then we get top of the stairs. Susan's at the top of the stairs looking down. Her eyes are darkened with mascara moistened by her tears. She sniffles and composes herself. Really simple, really basic. It's 3 sentences. It's not one long entire sentence. They're breaking it up with periods to make it easier to read. And I get the sentiment. And then back into the foyer, he looks past Seth to the stairs and sees Susan. He smiles from rim to rim. Honey, I'd like you to meet a friend of mine. Dell looks up the stairs. He pushes his mussed hair back and smiles humbly. That's all this moment is. But when you watch the actual recording of the scene, it's so moving and it's so touching, and it's John Hughes at his best, but then it's really John Candy at his best. And then Sue says, hello, Mr. Griffith. And that's pretty much it. From there, it gets very different in the script itself. But then Sue comes down, and they, Neil and Sue end up hugging, and there's a nice little kiss. And the movie ends on a really sweet image of John Candy and Dell watching them kiss, and he's so happy. And that's all that's really needed. So there you have it. As you can see, and I pointed out in the little screen recording there, the ending was quite a bit different. There was a lot more going on, and John Hughes knew, you know what, this might be Dell's story just as much or more than Neil's story. So let's end the movie on this really happy vision of John Candy. And it helps establish the fact that this is a movie about family, this is a movie about friends, it's about acceptance, love, all of those really easy, simple, so-called easy, simple emotions, but universal emotions. So without further ado, let's get into one of my favorite holiday movies, Plane, Trains, and Automobile. Is that the right way? Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, plural. Let's get into it.
Give my love to the family, will you?
Same to you.
Maybe I'll get a chance to meet him one day.
Okay. Say hello to Marie for me. I feel like I know her.
Yeah.
So. And you have a happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, you know it.
So long.
I like me. My wife likes me.
At the very least, the absolute minimum. You got a woman you love to grow old with. I've been spending too much time away from home. I haven't been home in years. I haven't been home in years. I haven't been home in years. Dell, what are you doing here? You said you were going home. What are you doing here?
I don't have a home. Marie's been dead for 8 years. You're one lucky guy, Neil. Look, I won't stay long or anything. Maybe I'll just come in and say hi, and then I'll be on my way, all right?
Just come on.
Hi, kiddo.
Daddy!
Hello, Griffith. I want you to meet my father-in-law, Walt.
My mother-in-law, Peg.
Hi.
My mother, Joy.
Well, my dad, Mark. Glad to see you, sir.
Welcome, Bill.
Hey guys, Neil Jr.
Hello, this is my little
Jim, Marty. And somewhere around here is my little baby boy, Steph. I'd like you to be a friend of mine.
Hello, Mr. Griffith.
Hello, Mrs. Page.